Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in northeastern Saskatchewan, where Red Earth and Shoal Lake Cree Nations and the RCMP say the search for a missing 5-year-old, Frank Young, will go into the weekend. Community leaders spoke of the grief and devastation they're all feeling on day 4 of searching. APTN's Leanne Sanders has this update.
Chief Marcel Head of Shoal Lake Cree Nation says Young's parents are members of his community. He says they've had to deal with the burden of searching for someone they love.
We're just are going to get exhausted and getting tired and already feeling the effects of the the ongoing search. So we'd like to call on other communities, First Nations alike, and as well as people that will provide the ongoing support for the search of little Frank.
There have been glimmers of hope as high-resolution cameras picked up signs of blue during aerial searches, but RCMP Sergeant Richard Tong says the items have turned out to be unrelated to Frank.
Our description of Frank Young has him wearing a blue windbreaker type jacket. So during the aerial searches, especially during the day with the high resolution cameras, the operators were focusing on blue objects. And these cameras are very high resolution to the point where the flight crew was leading ground searchers to blue objects that turned out to be a blue Pepsi can, a blue label on a water bottle.
Chief Head says the family and the 2 First Nations are overwhelmed by the support they've received. Frank Young has been missing since lunchtime on Tuesday. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
A video has gone viral showing 2 Nunavik police officers removing a screaming Inuk child from a home at the direction of a child apprehension worker who watches on. The 7-year-old's mother could only record the troubling scene for fear of being arrested. A warning, some may find this video hard to watch. His mother posted the video to TikTok, and it's since been shared thousands of times across all social media platforms. CTV Montreal broke the story. Quebec Youth Protection told CTV that police involvement in apprehensions isn't taken lightly. As for how it was done, they said, quote, "This was not standard procedure." Numerous calls by APTN to the Nunavik Police Service went unanswered. You can see that CTV story, including what the mother had to say, on our website, aptnnews.ca, and it is something APTN News will be following. It's taken just over 2 decades, but the Tolley family received an apology from the Quebec government and Montreal police on Friday over how the death of their mother was handled. In October 2001, 61-year-old Gladys Tolley was struck and killed by a Sûreté de Quebec police cruiser while crossing Quebec Highway 105 on the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe First Nation. Montreal police concluded Tolley's death was accidental and closed the case, but the family says important details were missed and the investigation lacked transparency. Officials apologized privately for failing to better communicate with the family. Tolley's daughter, Bridget, says it's a start, but she still has little faith in police.
I don't trust him. How can I trust him after this? It took them 20 years to come and talk to me. I mean, 20 years of, losing trust. And I, like, even today, I'm worried about what happens if anything happens to my family. Are they going to treat us right? Are they going to hate us for this? There's so much questions.
We want to hear what you think about it taking 20 years for an apology. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Former Nova Scotia and Newfoundland Regional Chief Morley Googoo appeared in a Nova Scotia provincial court today, where he was facing a charge of sexual assault. Angel Moore listened to the trial and has this report.
The alleged sexual assault occurred in 2013. The complainant, who cannot be named, says she went to Googoo's house to discuss community programs. Googoo brought her a glass of 7-Up. She felt drugged and said soon after Googoo sexually assaulted her. Googoo's lawyer, Chris Conahan, called Googoo's ex-wife, son, and his neighbor as witnesses. They testified Googoo was never home alone. But on cross-examination by Crown Attorney Tracy Strummy, the witnesses could not recall the exact dates. Court was adjourned till April 29th, when Morley Googoo is expected to testify. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, known as Halifax.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was part of a major announcement in Winnipeg today about a huge piece of downtown Winnipeg history. The Hudson's Bay building will be taken over by the Southern Chiefs organization and redeveloped as a symbol of reconciliation. Our Daryl Stranger was there and has this story.
We can agree that reconciliation is not just a word. It is meant to have action, and this is an example of that action.
Over 1 million hours of labor will turn the building into hundreds of affordable housing and assisted living units. A child care center, museum and art gallery, restaurants, and a healing center will also be on site.
From 1-bedroom to 3-bedroom units, and so we have assisted living, which is very important for many of our elders. We have daycare space for hundreds of our children, and for students who are going to university, and for families who need that support.
The federal government will be pitching in $65 million to assist in the project.
Today's announcement is more than just about a building. It's actually about rebuilding trust, rebuilding landmarks, rebuilding relationships. Winnipeg has the largest Indigenous population of any city in Canada, and I know that today's project will inspire people from coast to coast to coast.
The provincial government will add $10 million for the affordable housing component and another $25 million to preserve the historic parts of the building.
This is just such an important day, not only for our city, for our province, but for the entire country. This is about reconciliation and action, and you heard Grand Chief talk about that, you heard the Prime Minister talk about that. I'm going to reiterate that again. This is reconciliation and action, true reconciliation.
Grand Chief Daniels hopes to start construction in the next few months and has a goal of project completion in 36 months. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Can't wait to see how that transforms. A significant piece of property has been returned to its rightful owners. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. The Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte in Ontario is one big step closer to having land back, or in this case, an island. Although it isn't a large piece of property, it's a significant part of their history. Here's Annette Francis with more.
Foresters Island is located just south of the shores of Deseronto, Ontario. Tyendinaga Chief Don Miracle says it will soon be back in their hands, the rightful owners.
It was originally referred to as Captain John's Island before it was known as Foresters Island. It's historically important to our people because this place is where Captain John Deseronto led our people after we had to resettle after the Treaty of Paris of 1783 was signed.
The treaty ended the American Revolutionary War, but forced Tyendinaga's ancestors north of the border. According to Chief Miracle, the island was first gifted to Mohawk military figure Captain John Deseronto, and then in the 1800s it was purchased by an influential Mohawk physician. At that time, the island was in full swing with activities.
He built a very large building there, an orphanage, which is in the brochure for Dr. Yadeka, to provide a place, a refuge for orphan children of the Independent Order of Foresters. So their children, if they became orphan, could reside there. So he built basically a 3-story castle there that existed on that island as an orphanage, and it was torn down shortly after he died.
In 2005, Chief Miracle made the initial request to get the island back, but it wasn't until last month the Prince Edward County Municipal Council voted unanimously to give the uninhabited island back. County Mayor Steve Ferguson says it was the right thing to do.
We've had a very good relationship with Chief Miracle and the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, and we've been trying to build on that, particularly during this term of council, and recognizing the importance of truth and reconciliation, we've taken certain steps to strengthen our relationship. And I view this step of the process of the repatriation of Foresters Island as an important part of that process.
Chief Miracle isn't sure how the island became Crown land, but he suspects it's similar to what happened to First Nations across Canada.
So much of the land has been taken under suspicious circumstances, let's put it that way, and sometimes under fraudulent circumstances. Sometimes it was taken without any surrender of the people who owned it. So there's a variety of things that would give rise to claims.
Miracle says the next step is to start the additions to reserve process with the federal government. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory.
To the west coast now, where salmon stocks in British Columbia have been declining for decades. Today, in an effort to save those stocks, the BC and federal governments announced funding for salmon restoration and research. And the majority of that funding will go to programs led by Indigenous organizations. APTN's Lee Wilson reports.
There will be $33 million in funding for 22 projects in British Columbia that focus on restoring and rebuilding salmon stocks. At a press conference, Joyce Murray, Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, says that salmon populations in BC are at risk, and they are providing funding.
Pacific salmon populations are at historically low levels because of ocean conditions, habitat loss, and fishing pressures. And our government is acting. We're taking decisive actions to address these challenges, to support conservation, and to bring about positive outcomes.
Funding will go through the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, which helps all wild fish, including salmon stocks. Last year, DFO closed nearly 60% of commercial salmon fisheries in BC in an attempt to save Pacific salmon after decades of declining stocks. Climate change and habitat loss are identified as few of the driving factors. Indigenous communities around the province have expressed concerns about the loss of salmon. Finn Donnelly of the BC government shared that the majority of projects receiving funding are Indigenous-led.
18 of the 22 project recipients we are announcing today are directly managed by First Nations.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Reaction to the Pope's residential schools apology earlier this month has been mixed. Some people were overjoyed, while others called for more. And others still, like the Manitoba Métis Federation, got their own audience with His Holiness this week. Harvard professor Dr. Joseph P. Gahn has been watching it all from the U.S., where he is the director of the university's Native American program. We spoke with Dr. Gahn earlier in the week. Dr. Gahn, thanks so much for taking some time here for us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
What do you see as the differences between the U.S. and Canadian Indigenous experience and history?
Well, like all Indigenous peoples, Native folks in Canada and the United States have been subject to long centuries of colonial dispossession and subjugation. I think the contours of that dispossession and subjugation have changed just a bit between the communities. So in the United States, for example, there were a great number of Indian wars in which the military chased Indian people and murdered Indian people and captured Native people, relocated them to reservations and so on. I think when it comes then to thinking about the legacy and history of colonialism in these distinct nation states, these kinds of different histories play out a little separately. I know that in Canada, for example, a big part of the way colonial subjugation has been described has been in the legacy of the residential schools. And certainly we had boarding schools here in the United States as well. We invented them, in fact, and exported them. But I think that that pales a little more in comparison to other aspects of colonization that render the articulation of Indian affairs in different ways.
How will this federal investigative report into the history of boarding schools bring that history, do you think, into focus?
Well, you know, the long legacy of settler colonialism in our nation states has been erasure of Indigenous presence and perspective. And so these kinds of government reports are really important for reversing the ignorance and the invisibility associated with Indigenous peoples in the United States. So I think it will help a lot to illuminate an important part of history that will bring attention to the history and the current situation that results from that history in American Indian and Alaska Native communities.
Are you hopeful that there will be some sort of a reckoning like what has been going on in Canada?
Well, one can always be hopeful about such reckonings, but again, the United States operates on a kind of different racial dynamic. The dynamic here tends to be a black-white dynamic. Indian people are often much less visible in comparison to that main way of racial relations unfolding. I think Canada has a really different history and a different dynamic, and so the TRC made a lot of sense in Canada. I'm not too optimistic that we'll see that kind of reckoning, but hopefully there will be some good things that follow from this kind of attention and visibility.
What do you think will happen now? Apologies? Are apologies even enough?
Apologies help. So an apology would be good, and that's a start. I think apologies without reparation are pretty empty. I think most Native and Indigenous people feel that way as well. So I think that if there could be some form of reparation that would make a concrete difference in the lives of Indian people today, that could be really good.
Dr. Gahn, we'll have to leave it there, but sure do appreciate you taking some time to speak with us about this.
My pleasure. Thanks.
APTN Investigates is back with a new episode tonight. More on that after the break. welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And this was the view in Winnipeg, Manitoba, just earlier this week. Charmaine Straker took this photo during her stroll through the beautiful Assiniboine Park. Well, the snow has since melted. It's pouring rain out there right now, but there's a good chance it will snow again any day now. Be sure to email your photos to share@aptn.ca for a chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at Saturday's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, +4 with showers in St. John's, 8 in Halifax. -1 with snow in Kuujjuaq, +1 and snow in Nain. 6 above in Montreal, +1 in Chibougamau. 7 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, rain, and 6 in North Bay. 4 and showers for Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout. In northern Manitoba, 6 with rain in God's Lake, 9 in Norway House. 5 and rain in Winnipeg, snow, and -3 for Dauphin. +4 with snow in Regina, 11 for Saskatoon. +2 and sunny in Meadow Lake, 11 for La Ronge. Over in northern Alberta, 11 for Fort McMurray, 8 in High Level. 10 in Edmonton, 12 for Lethbridge. 15 in Vancouver, 19 for Kamloops. 14 in Prince George, showers and 11 in Smithers. +2 in Old Crow, rain, and 7 for Whitehorse. -4 in Yellowknife, +4 in Norman Wells. -8 with snow in Sax Harbor, flurries and -2 in Paulituck. Snow and -21 in Chesterfield, 19 below in Cambridge Bay. -19 for Resolute, 23 below in Joe Haven. APTN Investigates is back with an all-new episode tonight titled, What Happens Next? It's a look at how the world changed with the discovery of unmarked graves at residential school grounds. Paul Barnsley worked on this story and he spoke with Melissa earlier in the week.
Paul, you've covered the Indian residential school saga your whole career. What's the jump-off point for this Investigate story?
You could just see from the reaction of mainstream Canadians, non-Indigenous Canadians, that this got their attention. I felt like the whole country was in a state of shock when the graves were discovered, announced. And I just, at the time, I remember thinking, I wonder if this is going to change the way things proceed from now on, as opposed to how they went in the past, where survivors were, the onus was always on them to prove that they'd been through these experiences, and if they couldn't prove it, they were left out of the compensation and that. Yeah. And then the phone started ringing, and all the survivors were having similar thoughts. So I started poking around and found that there was some interesting research being done, and we'll have a lot of that in the story on Friday.
Will we get a good idea from the story about what's going to happen next?
We're gonna get, it's gonna be one of these where we explored with some smart people that have been engaged in this for a long time, who think the residential school settlement agreement should be reopened. The idea that they weren't believed when they told the stories about the graves, and the fact that they've been vindicated. They're going, I wasn't compensated for that, because either they didn't believe me or they lost my records or something. So I wasn't fully compensated. And now the fight will be about the records, although what we're hearing from one very reliable source is that things are changing. The churches are turning over records. The government is turning over records. But you know, the devil will be in the details. There were attempts all the way along to provide immunity to perpetrators in order to get to the truth. And I know an awful lot of the folks I talked to, most of them survivors, people I met over the years, were going, no, we want justice.
Yeah.
You know, all of these bodies have a story behind them, and we want closure, we want to know what happened, and we want any wrongdoers to be held accountable. I don't know if that's what's going to happen next. I think that would be the least likely thing. But there could be some pretty serious changes in how people are compensated or were compensated.
Well, we're happy that you could pop by and talk about this coming up on APTN Investigates. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
You can watch what happens next in less than 2 minutes right here on APTN Investigates. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and download the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Stick around. APTN Investigates is next. Have a great night.